6-year-old Charlie Bennett stepped into the imposing courthouse clutching his worn Batman backpack, while spectators gasped at the sight of such a young defendant. Officer Richard Hawkins had accused the kindergartner of orchestrating a sophisticated lunch money theft ring at Riverside Elementary. The ridiculous nature of the accusation against the small boy with wild red curls and missing front teeth drew national attention as Charlie faced a detective who refused to admit he had the wrong suspect. The marble floors echoed with each tiny step. Charlie took his light up Batman sneakers, blinking against the polished surface, creating a trail of red and blue lights that seemed to mock the police lights that had appeared at his house just 3 weeks ago when Officer Hawkins had arrived with a search warrant looking for stolen lunch money in the boy's bedroom. The memory of that night still brought tears to his mother's eyes as she walked beside him, now her hand protectively on his shoulder, while his father Thomas Bennett, a respected local pediatrician, walked ahead speaking quietly with their defense attorney. The courtroom itself seemed to swallow them whole as they pushed through heavy wooden doors that creaked ominously. Charlie clutched his backpack tighter as he noticed at least 50 pairs of eyes, all staring at him. Some belonged to reporters furiously scribbling in notepads, others to concerned parents from Riverside Elementary, and even a few of his classmates who had been subpoenaed as witnesses by Officer Hawkins in his crusade to prove the impossible. Officer Hawkins sat at the prosecution table, his usually pristine uniform showing signs of strain around the collar, his tie slightly askew, betraying the sleepless nights that had plagued him since launching this investigation. The officer had built his reputation on solving complex cases, but this one had become an obsession ever since lunch money started disappearing from the school's new digital payment system in amounts that suggested an understanding of technology far beyond what any 6-year-old should possess. Charlie's eyes wandered to the judge's bench, where Judge Maria Rodriguez would soon decide his fate. The elderly judge was known for her fairness, especially in cases involving children, but even she appeared troubled by the sight of such a young defendant in her courtroom. Her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she reviewed the case files, her expression unreadable. The gallery behind Charlie filled quickly with supporters, including Ms. Parker, his kindergarten teacher, who had brought along Charlie's perfect attendance certificates and gold star behavior charts from the entire school year. Officer Hawkins had dismissed these character witnesses as irrelevant, focusing instead on the circumstantial evidence that Charlie had been seen near the school office during each theft and had recently started bringing extra snacks to share with his classmates. What Officer Hawkins didn't yet know was that Charlie's Batman backpack contained more than just his favorite superhero action figure. Hidden in a secret pocket was a crayon drawing Charlie had made of the real thief, a figure he had glimpsed in the hallway wearing what looked like a janitor's uniform but moving like someone much younger than the school's elderly custodian, Miss Jenkins. The drawing might seem childish to most, but to Charlie it held the key to proving his innocence. Defense attorney Jessica Martinez adjusted her glasses as she organized her files at the defense table, her usual confidence bolstered by the overwhelming evidence of Charlie's innocence. She had spent countless hours working with the 6-year-old, preparing him for this day, ensuring he understood the importance of telling the truth, while also trying to maintain his innocent view of justice and law enforcement despite the circumstance. The courtroom fell into an expectant hush as Judge Rodriguez prepared to begin the proceedings. Charlie's Batman action figure, clutched tightly in his small fist, caught the fluorescent lighting, making the tiny cake glisten. The same action figure that had once given him confidence to face imaginary villains would now need to help him face a very real challenge in a place where truth and justice were supposed to prevail but had somehow lost their way in Officer Hawkins' determined pursuit of the wrong suspect. The courtroom fell silent as security footage played showing multiple lunch money thefts, but the young thief always wore a green monster mask. Charlie trembled as he watched, holding his favorite Batman action figure, which ironically had been a gift from Officer Hawkins during a school safety presentation months ago. The officer's determined expression cracked slightly at the sight before quickly hardening again, his career riding on this high-profile case. The grainy black and white footage flickered across the large screen mounted on the courtroom wall, showing a figure in the monster mask smoothly navigating the school's payment system terminal with unexpected expertise. While Charlie squinted at the screen, his small face scrunched in concentration, he noticed something nobody else had caught yet. The thief was wearing light up sneakers, just like his, except these flashed green and yellow, not red and blue like his beloved Batman shoes. The detail made him wiggle excitedly in his chair, but his attorney gently reminded him to stay still. Officer Hawkins stood to present his evidence, pointing out how the thief appeared in the footage at exactly the times when Charlie had bathroom passes from class. The officer had meticulously created a timeline matching bathroom breaks with thefts, but failed to mention how common it was for kindergarteners to request frequent bathroom visits. Ms. Parker shifted uncomfortably in her seat, knowing she had given out dozens of similar passes to other students that day. The prosecution played another clip, this time showing the masked figure dropping something that looked like a Batman sticker near the scene. Charlie's eyes widened with recognition. It was indeed his sticker, one he had lost that day while running to catch up with his best friend Tommy during recess. He had been so upset about losing it that he had spent his entire lunch period searching the halls with Tommy and the lunch monitor Mrs. Davis looking for it. But Officer Hawkins presented this as evidence of Charlie's presence during the theft. Jessica Martinez, Charlie's defense attorney, rose smoothly from her chair, her heels clicking purposefully across the courtroom floor. As she approached the evidence table where Charlie's Batman backpack sat, she carefully unzipped the front pocket, revealing a stack of identical Batman stickers, the same ones the school guidance counselor had given to every kindergarten student during Hero Week. The prosecution's smoking gun evidence suddenly seemed far less convincing as whispers rippled through the courtroom. Charlie watched the adults around him with growing confusion, his small hands still clutching the Batman figure that Officer Hawkins had given him during that school visit. The memory of that day played in his mind, how the officer had knelt down to his level, smiled warmly, and told him that real heroes always protect others. Charlie couldn't understand why the same officer now stood so tall and scary, pointing at him with accusations that made his tummy feel funny and his eyes want to cry. The security footage continued to play, showing different angles of the school hallways. Charlie noticed his classmate Emma in the background of one clip, walking with a hall pass during the exact time he was supposedly stealing money. Emma sat in the gallery now, with her mother, her pink unicorn backpack clutched tightly as she waited to testify about how she and Charlie had been walking together to the nurse's office during one of the thefts because Charlie had scraped his knee during recess. Officer Hawkins' voice boomed through the courtroom as he described the sophisticated nature of the thefts, how the culprit had somehow bypassed the school's new digital payment system's security features, pointing out that Charlie's father was known to be tech-savvy and could have taught his son how to manipulate the system. What the officer didn't know was that Thomas Bennett still struggled to program his own coffee maker and relied on Charlie to help him operate the TV remote. Jessica Martinez watched the security footage with growing confidence, noting how the masked figure moved with a fluid grace that no kindergartner possessed, the way they expertly typed on the payment terminal keypad, reaching it without standing on tiptoes as any 6-year-old would need to do. She had arranged for a child development expert to testify about the physical capabilities of kindergarten students and how the actions shown in the video would be impossible for someone Charlie's age and height. The Batman action figure in Charlie's hands caught the light again as another piece of footage began to play, this time showing the school cafeteria during lunch period. Charlie could be seen clearly at his usual table sharing his cookie with Tommy, while in the background, barely visible, the green masked figure slipped through the door, heading toward the payment terminal. Charlie's innocence was literally caught on camera, but Officer Hawkins had somehow missed or chosen to ignore this crucial detail. Defense attorney Jessica Martinez unleashed a bombshell revelation. Charlie had been in the hospital during two of the biggest heists. Getting his tonsils removed, hospital footage showed him in his bed, watching cartoons and eating ice cream, while the masked thief struck at school. Officer Hawkins' face reddened as whispers rippled through the courtroom and Charlie innocently offered him a grape lollipop from his backpack. Martinez approached the evidence table with a thick medical file from Riverside Children's Hospital. Charlie's recent tonsillectomy had been well documented with time-stamped photos, nurses' notes, and a continuous video feed from the pediatric ward security system required for all young patients. The footage showed Charlie peacefully sleeping in his hospital bed, clutching his Batman figure while wearing his favorite superhero pajamas at the exact moment when the largest theft of $400 occurred at the school payment terminal. Sarah Chen, the surgeon who performed Charlie's operation, sat in the witness stand, her professional demeanor adding weight to her testimony as she detailed how Charlie had been under her direct supervision during the surgery and subsequent recovery. She explained how she had even taken a special interest in the young patient who had impressed her by telling jokes to other scared children in the pre-op ward to help them feel better about their own surgeries. Officer Hawkins' legal team scrambled to suggest that Charlie might have had an accomplice, but their theory fell apart when security footage showed Charlie FaceTiming with his entire kindergarten class from his hospital room during another theft. His classmates had sung Get Well songs and shown him the Get Well cards they had made, while the masked figure was simultaneously seen prowling the school halls in the background of another security camera feed. Charlie's mother, Sandra Bennett, took the stand next, sharing photos from Charlie's hospital stay, including one particularly damaging to the prosecution, showing Charlie struggling to eat his first popsicle after surgery at precisely 12:47 p.m., the exact time Officer Hawkins had claimed Charlie was downloading sensitive payment data from the school computer. The jury watched as she wiped tears from her eyes, describing how her son had been more concerned about missing his friends than his own discomfort. The hospital cafeteria staff had also provided evidence in the form of Charlie's lunch orders, each meal carefully selected by the young boy, who insisted on having Batman-shaped sandwiches to help him feel brave. Head nurse Jenny Thompson testified about how Charlie had shared his blue jello with a younger patient in the next bed, saying nobody should eat lunch alone. The irony of him being accused of stealing lunch money while freely sharing his own food was not lost on the courtroom. As Martinez presented the hospital evidence, Charlie sat at the defense table drawing pictures with crayons provided by the court clerk, his small legs swinging beneath the chair. Unable to reach the floor, he had created a detailed picture of the hospital room, including the cartoon channel playing on TV, and his favorite nurse Mitchell, who had given him extra ice cream when he had been brave during a blood test. Officer Hawkins found himself staring at the drawing, his resolve visibly shaking. The prosecution attempted to challenge the hospital timeline, but Charlie's father, Duffer Bennett, produced the original admission forms, showing how he had specifically scheduled the surgery for those dates to minimize Charlie's missed school days. The hospital gift shop receipt for the new Batman figure, bought to replace the one Charlie had accidentally dropped in the hospital parking lot, further confirmed their presence that day, as did security footage of them entering and leaving the hospital. Charlie's hospital roommate, 7-year-old Kevin Martinez, no relation to the defense attorney, had also been subpoenaed to testify via video call from his home, where he was recovering from his own surgery. Kevin's face lit up the courtroom screen as he enthusiastically described how he and Charlie had spent hours playing superhero games and watching cartoons together during the days in question. His mother, a hospital volunteer, confirmed supervising their activities during the exact times of the school thefts. The final piece of hospital evidence came from an unexpected source. The hospital's art therapist had recorded Charlie participating in a group session where young patients painted their feelings about being in the hospital. Charlie's painting of Batman protecting sick children hung proudly in the pediatric ward, dated and time-stamped precisely when Officer Hawkins claimed the young boy had been breaking into the school's computer system. Charlie looked up at the officer with innocent eyes, still holding out the grape lollipop as a peace offering, while the evidence of his innocence mounted irrefutably before the court. The case took an unexpected turn when school janitor Miss Peterson revealed hidden hallway cameras he had installed to catch students leaving mess in the corridors. The new angles showed the thief was significantly taller than Charlie and walked with a distinctive limp. Charlie excitedly pointed out that the masked person moved just like his favorite lunch lady, Mrs. Thompson, who had mysteriously quit last week. Mr. Peterson shuffled to the witness stand, his weathered hands clutching a small tablet computer that contained months of secret footage. The elderly janitor explained how he had grown tired of cleaning up after messy students and had taken it upon himself to install tiny cameras in the exit signs throughout the school corridors. The cameras were so well hidden that even the school administration had no idea they existed until now, their strategic placement providing crystal clear views of areas the regular security cameras missed. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Mr. Peterson played video after video showing the masked figure from entirely new angles. The thief clearly stood at least 5 feet tall and moved with an obvious limp, favoring their right leg. Charlie, who barely reached 4 feet in height, stood up next to the projection screen at his attorney's request, making the height difference unmistakable. Several jurors shook their heads in disbelief that anyone had ever thought this small child could be the culprit. Officer Hawkins leaned forward in his chair, his face growing increasingly pale as Mr. Peterson explained how he had compiled the footage into a single timeline. The janitor had originally been looking for students who had been spilling milk in the hallways, but had inadvertently captured every single theft in perfect detail, including several incidents that occurred while Charlie was demonstrably elsewhere, such as during the school's winter concert where he had played a singing tree. Charlie's face lit up with recognition as they watched one particular clip showing the thief hurrying through the halls. He tugged excitedly at his attorney's sleeve, pointing at the screen and whispering how he recognized the way the person moved. It was the same unique gait he had observed countless times while waiting in the lunch line as Mrs. Thompson served his favorite chocolate milk. She had always been extra kind to him, giving him double portions when he looked hungry, but had suddenly stopped coming to work the previous week. The hidden cameras had captured something else crucial. The thief knew the exact location of every blind spot in the school's official security system, moving confidently through areas that should have been unfamiliar to an outsider. This knowledge pointed to someone intimately familiar with the school's layout and security protocols. Charlie raised his hand like he was in class, causing a ripple of gentle laughter in the courtroom as he waited to be called on, before sharing that Mrs. Thompson had worked at the school for 15 years, longer than any other staff member. Mr. Peterson continued his testimony, revealing how he had noticed Mrs. Thompson staying late several evenings, claiming to be cleaning the kitchen, but the cameras showed her accessing the payment terminal after hours on multiple occasions. He had assumed she was doing authorized work and had never thought to report it. The janitor apologized to Charlie, his voice thick with emotion, for not coming forward sooner with evidence that could have prevented the boy's ordeal. Defense attorney Martinez seized upon this new information, displaying Mrs. Thompson's employment records, which showed increasing financial troubles, multiple requests for salary advances, and a recent denial for a loan to pay for her husband's medical treatment. Charlie listened intently, his face showing confusion and concern as he learned about his favorite lunch lady's struggles. He reached into his Batman backpack, pulling out a slightly squashed sandwich she had once given him free of charge when he had forgotten his lunch money. Officer Hawkins watched the footage, his professional demeanor crumbling as Mr. Peterson played one final clip showing the masked figure stumbling slightly while running their right leg, dragging notably, just as Mrs. Thompson's did, an injury she had sustained years ago during a kitchen accident. Charlie turned to the officer with innocent wisdom beyond his years, saying sometimes good people do bad things when they're scared, just like in his Batman comics when Catwoman stole to feed hungry cats. The revelation of the hidden camera footage transformed the entire case, shifting focus entirely away from Charlie and toward the missing lunch lady. Mr. Peterson admitted he knew where to find her, having overheard her talking about staying with her sister in the next town. Charlie, still clutching his Batman figures, suggested that maybe they could help Mrs. Thompson instead of punishing her, remembering how she had always helped students who couldn't afford lunch, even paying for meals from her own pocket sometimes. Officer Hawkins' partner, rookie officer Sarah Chen, broke ranks and testified that Hawkins had been under intense pressure to solve the case quickly as wealthy parents threatened to withdraw their children from the school. She revealed how Hawkins had ignored evidence pointing to adult involvement, choosing instead to build a case against Charlie because he had once caught the boy sharing his lunch money with a friend who forgot theirs. Officer Chen nervously adjusted her badge as she sat in the witness stand, her usual confidence replaced by visible discomfort. At testifying against her mentor and partner, she described the mounting pressure from the school board, particularly from board member Victoria Reynolds, whose family had donated the new digital payment system. Reynolds had demanded daily updates and threatened to withdraw not only her own children but to convince other wealthy families to do the same if the thief was caught immediately. The young officer's voice trembled as she recounted finding security footage showing an adult-sized figure, but Hawkins had dismissed it, focusing instead on the coincidence that Charlie had been seen sharing his lunch money with a new student named Maria, whose family had recently immigrated and sometimes struggled to afford lunch. Chen described how Hawkins had twisted this act of kindness into evidence of guilt, suggesting Charlie was stealing money to help other students, a theory that completely misunderstood the simple generosity of a child. Charlie sat quietly during Officer Chen's testimony, his Batman figure now wearing a small paper badge he had made during a court recess. He listened as Chen described the day Hawkins had first accused him, remembering how confused he had felt when the officer who had once been so kind suddenly looked at him with suspicion. Charlie's mother squeezed his hand as Chen revealed how she had tried to convince Hawkins that a kindergartner couldn't possibly understand the complexities of digital theft. The courtroom grew tense as Officer Chen produced her personal case notes, showing how Hawkins had deliberately overlooked witness statements from teachers who had seen Charlie in class during several thefts. She described finding Mrs. Thompson's personnel file with noted financial difficulties, but Hawkins had insisted it was irrelevant. Chen admitted her own guilt in staying silent for so long, her voice breaking as she apologized directly to Charlie for not having the courage to speak up sooner. Charlie's friend Maria took the stand next, her small voice steady, as she described how Charlie had shared not only his lunch money but also his Batman cookies and chocolate milk with her when she was new to the school and hadn't yet received her lunch account. She explained how Charlie had told her that heroes always help people in need and that his father had taught him to share with those who had less. The simplicity and innocence of her testimony brought tears to several jurors' eyes. Officer Chen continued, revealing how the wealthy parents' pressure had led to rushed judgments and ignored protocols. She described finding surveillance photos of Mrs. Thompson at various times when thefts occurred, but Hawkins had filed them away without investigation. The photos now displayed on the courtroom screen showed the lunch lady's distinctive limp, perfectly matching the figure in the mask. Charlie watched the screen with sad eyes, remembering how Mrs. Thompson had always given him extra portions, saying he was too skinny. The rookie officer's testimony took an emotional turn as she described her own childhood as a daughter of immigrants who had sometimes struggled to afford school lunches. She understood firsthand the shame and hunger that came with poverty. Her voice strengthened as she explained how this personal experience had made her increasingly uncomfortable with Hawkins' fixation on prosecuting a child whose only crime had been showing kindness to a classmate in need. Charlie suddenly stood up, walking toward Officer Chen with his Batman figure extended toward her, saying she was a real hero for telling the truth, just like Batman would. The unexpected gesture caused Chen to break down in tears as she accepted the toy, her testimony concluding with a powerful statement about how the pressure to solve cases quickly should never override the duty to protect innocent citizens, especially children. Hawkins sat slumped in his chair, his face a mask of shame as his partner's words laid bare how ambition and external pressure had corrupted his judgment and nearly destroyed a child's life. Mrs. Thompson burst through the courtroom doors, surrendering herself. She had been stealing to pay for her sick husband's medical bills. Charlie jumped up and hugged her crying, not because she took the money, but because she hadn't trusted him enough to ask for help. His father had been offering free medical services to families in need all along. The sudden entrance silenced the courtroom as Mrs. Thompson limped down the center aisle, her familiar gait matching perfectly with the security footage, her face streaked with tears as she clutched a green monster mask in her trembling hands. She had been watching the trial coverage on local news and couldn't bear to see Charlie suffering for her crimes anymore, her conscience finally breaking when she saw him offering Officer Hawkins a lollipop despite everything. Charlie broke free from his mother's grasp, running toward his favorite lunch lady, his Batman backpack bouncing against his small frame. As he wrapped his arms around her waist, Mrs. Thompson dropped to her knees, ignoring the pain in her bad leg as she hugged him back, sobbing as she explained how she had stolen the money to pay for her husband Bill's heart medication. The insurance company had denied their claims, leaving them desperate and afraid. Charlie listened, with wide eyes still holding onto her uniform. Bennett stood up, his voice carrying across the hushed courtroom as he explained his free clinic program for families in need. He had started it after losing his own brother to treatable illness because they couldn't afford care as children. Mrs. Thompson looked up in shock as he described how he had helped dozens of families in their community, including several school staff members. She had never known about the program because pride had kept her from asking for help, assuming no one would care about a lunch lady's problems. The prosecution's case completely unraveled as Mrs. Thompson provided a detailed confession explaining how she had used her knowledge of the school's schedule and security systems to time the thefts. She revealed a notebook containing careful recordings of every dollar taken and how it had been spent on medical bills, showing how she had planned to repay everything once her husband recovered. Charlie sat beside her on the witness stand, now his small hand holding hers, as she described her husband's worsening condition. Officer Hawkins stood up, his face ashen as he listened to Mrs. Thompson describe how she had chosen the monster mask because it was left behind after the school's Halloween party. She had noticed Charlie playing with it earlier that day, which had given her the idea to use it as a disguise, never imagining the kind-hearted boy would end up being blamed. Charlie looked at the officer with forgiveness in his eyes, remembering the day they had first met during the school safety presentation when Hawkins had seemed like a hero. Board member Victoria Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Mrs. Thompson described how the new digital payment system Reynolds' family had donated had actually made it harder for poor families to access reduced lunch programs. The old system had allowed lunch ladies to quietly help struggling students, but the digital tracking meant every transaction was recorded. Charlie raised his hand, again causing gentle laughter, as he asked if they could make a new system that helped people instead of catching them. Mrs. Thompson reached into her purse, pulling out carefully preserved receipts for all the heart medication and doctor's visits she had paid for with the stolen money, explaining how her husband Bill had begged her to stop stealing, but she had been too scared to watch him suffer. Charlie's father examined the medical records, his professional demeanor softening as he recognized the severity of Bill's condition, immediately offering to take over his care through the free clinic program. The courtroom watched in emotional silence as Charlie opened his Batman backpack, pulling out carefully wrapped cookies he had saved from his lunch, explaining that he always kept extra food in case someone was hungry, just like Mrs. Thompson had taught him. He handed her a cookie saying heroes help people who are scared and hungry, causing several jurors to wipe away tears as the pure wisdom of a child cut through the complexity of adult problems. Officer Hawkins finally removed his badge, placing it on the evidence table as he realized how far he had strayed from his own early ideals of protecting and serving his community. The courtroom atmosphere transformed as Mr. Bill Thompson was wheeled in by a hospital nurse, his frail form belying his determined spirit to support his wife. He had checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice after seeing the news coverage of Charlie's trial, his heart monitor beeping steadily. As he positioned himself next to his wife, Charlie stared in wonder at all the medical equipment, recognizing some of it from his own recent hospital stay. Mrs. Thompson rushed to her husband's side, guilt and love washing over her face as she explained how she had kept her actions secret from him for months. Bill reached for her hand, his voice weak but clear as he revealed how he had discovered the truth, finding the monster mask hidden in their garage, but had been too sick to stop her. His words carried across the silent courtroom as he described the agony of watching his wife risk everything to keep him alive. Charlie approached the couple, his Batman cape now tied around his shoulders, a gift from Officer Chen, who had retrieved it from the evidence locker. The young boy looked at Bill's heart monitor with curiosity, asking if it was like the one he had seen in his father's clinic. Miss Thompson smiled weakly, explaining how the machine helped doctors know if his heart was working properly. Charlie nodded sagely, declaring that his dad could fix hearts because he was a superhero doctor, just like how Batman fixes Gotham. Deb Bennett stepped forward, medical credentials in hand, as he examined Bill's charts, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine concern. He announced to the court that Bill needed immediate specialized care, explaining how his free clinic program could provide the necessary treatment. Charlie tugged at his father's white coat, asking if they could give Mr. Thompson his special heart medicine right now, just like how Bruce Wayne uses his money to help people in need. Board member Reynolds stood up, her carefully maintained composure cracking as she watched the scene unfold. She approached the judge, requesting permission to speak, revealing how her own father had died from lack of medical care before her family had acquired their wealth. Her donation of the digital payment system had been intended to prevent theft, but had instead created barriers for those most in need. Charlie listened intently as she pledged to establish a new emergency medical fund for school staff members. Officer Hawkins moved closer to the Thompson family, his earlier certainty replaced by deep remorse. He shared his own story of losing his mother to illness when he was only slightly older than Charlie, explaining how that loss had driven him to seek justice, but somewhere along the way he had forgotten the difference between justice and vengeance. Charlie reached for the officer's hand the same way he had reached for Mrs. Thompson's, telling him that sometimes even Batman makes mistakes. Mrs. Thompson revealed a small notebook filled with careful calculations, showing her plan to repay every stolen dollar. Once Bill recovered, she had kept track of each missing amount, knowing that someone would eventually discover the truth. Charlie examined the notebook, his face brightening as he recognized the same math problems they worked on in class, offering to help her count all the numbers because he had just learned multiplication tables in Ennis Parker's class. The hospital nurse attending to Bill spoke up, explaining how she had witnessed countless families torn apart by medical debt, her voice steady as she described the impossible choices people make when faced with losing their loved ones. Charlie listened with unusual stillness for a 6-year-old, his hand still holding Officer Hawkins as he absorbed the complexity of adult problems through the pure lens of childhood understanding. Judge Rodriguez watched the scene unfold, her years of experience having never presented such a unique intersection of justice, mercy, and innocence. She observed how Charlie moved between the adults, offering comfort and forgiveness with natural grace, his small presence somehow bridging the gaps between right and wrong, law and compassion, duty and humanity. Gil Thompson's heart monitor beat steadily in the background like a metronome, keeping time as the courtroom witnessed the power of truth and reconciliation through the eyes of a child. Judge Rodriguez removed her glasses, folding her hands deliberately on the bench as she prepared to address the extraordinary scene before her courtroom. Charlie sat between Officer Hawkins and Mrs. Thompson, his small legs swinging beneath the chair as he continued drawing in his Batman notepad. The judge had watched this child demonstrate more wisdom and compassion throughout the trial than many adults who had stood before her in decades of service. The judge began by addressing the multiple issues that had led to this moment, her voice carrying authority yet compassion as she spoke about the failures of various systems that had brought them all here: the healthcare system that had denied Bill Thompson necessary treatment, the school system that had inadvertently created barriers for struggling families, and the justice system that had almost condemned an innocent child. In its rush to find a convenient solution, Charlie looked up from his drawing, a picture of everyone in the courtroom holding hands. Mrs. Thompson stood supported by her husband's wheelchair. As the judge discussed the legal implications of her actions, Charlie reached for her hand, just as he had drawn in his picture, his other hand still holding on to Officer Hawkins, creating a physical bridge between accused and accuser. The judge noted this gesture, her voice softening as she acknowledged how a child's simple act of forgiveness had shown them all a better path forward. Officer Hawkins requested permission to address the court, his badge still lying on the evidence table. As he spoke about his own transformation throughout the trial, he described how his determination to solve the case had blinded him to obvious truth, and how a 6-year-old's unwavering belief in heroes had reminded him of his original reason for becoming a police officer. Charlie beamed at him, sharing how he still wanted to be a police officer just like Hawkins, but one who helps people like Mrs. Thompson instead of scaling them. Board member Reynolds approached the bench, her designer suit contrasting sharply with Mrs. Thompson's cafeteria uniform, as she presented a proposal to immediately establish an emergency assistance fund for school employees. She explained how Charlie's story had inspired her to redirect her family's resources toward preventing similar situations in the future. The judge listened intently as Reynolds detailed plans to revise the lunch payment system to include confidential assistance options. Bennett stepped forward with Bill's medical files, outlining a treatment plan that would be fully covered through his clinic program. Charlie proudly announced that his dad could fix any heart because he was better than a superhero, causing gentle laughter to ripple through the courtroom. The judge smiled as she watched the young boy's absolute faith in his father's abilities mirror his equally strong belief in justice and redemption. The prosecutor rose to withdraw all charges against Charlie, his former legal language faltering as he faced the small boy who had unwittingly exposed the cracks in their rushed investigation. Charlie responded by offering him a Batman sticker from his collection, saying that everyone deserves a second chance, just like how Batman always gives Catwoman another opportunity to be good. The simple wisdom of his words caused several jury members to wipe away tears. Judge Rodriguez began outlining her decision regarding Mrs. Thompson, emphasizing rehabilitation over punishment. She proposed a program where Mrs. Thompson would repay the stolen funds through community service, establishing a food security program at the school. Charlie interrupted, asking if Mrs. Thompson could still make his special chocolate milk, causing the judge to smile as she incorporated the request into her official ruling. Officer Chen, who had remained quietly supportive throughout the proceedings, approached with Charlie's original Batman figure, the one that had started their connection during the school safety presentation. Charlie looked between the toy and Officer Hawkins before breaking into a wide smile and presenting it to Mrs. Thompson, declaring that she needed a superhero to watch over her just like Batman watches over Gotham. The judge concluded by addressing Charlie directly, praising his extraordinary capacity for forgiveness and his innate understanding of justice that had helped them all see beyond rigid laws to the humanity beneath. Charlie listened solemnly before raising his hand again, asking if everyone could have lunch together, since his dad always said sharing food makes people friends. The judge found herself nodding at the simple yet profound suggestion that would begin their community's healing process. 6 months after the trial, Riverside Elementary's cafeteria buzzed with excitement as students, staff, and community members gathered for the grand opening of the Thompson Care Kitchen, named in honor of the case that had transformed their community. Charlie stood proudly beside Mrs. Thompson, his Batman cape flowing behind him as they cut the ribbon together. The new facility would ensure no child or staff member would ever go hungry or feel ashamed to ask for help. Officer Hawkins, now running the school's new community outreach program, watched from the crowd, his badge restored, but with a new sense of purpose. He had spent the past months working alongside Mrs. Thompson to identify and assist struggling families. Charlie had appointed him official superhero helper, a title the officer wore with more pride than any official commendation, his experience having taught him that true justice required both strength and compassion. Bill Thompson sat nearby, his color restored and health improving under Dr. Bennett's care. The free clinic program had expanded to serve the entire school district. With support from the Reynolds Family Foundation, Charlie often visited the clinic after school, bringing his Batman comics to share with patients in the waiting room, just as he had done during his own hospital stay. Mrs. Thompson worked part-time in both the care kitchen and the clinic cafeteria, her dedication to helping others now finding legitimate channels. Board member Reynolds had transformed the digital payment system into a model program for schools nationwide. The new interface included discrete assistance options and a pay-it-forward feature allowing families to help others anonymously. Charlie had suggested adding superhero themes to make asking for help feel less scary, his idea leading to students calling it the Justice League program, where everyone could be a hero by helping others. Officer Chen had received a promotion to lead youth outreach, inspired by her role in preventing a miscarriage of justice. She and Charlie had developed a junior safety patrol program where older students helped younger ones feel protected and cared for. At school, the green monster mask now sat in a display case in her office, a reminder that truth could wear many faces, but justice required looking beyond appearances. Dr. Bennett's clinic walls were covered with children's artwork, including Charlie's original courtroom drawing, showing everyone holding hands. The picture had become a symbol of their community's transformation. Charlie still insisted on keeping his Batman backpacks stocked with extra snacks, but now it was official policy, encouraged by the care kitchen staff, who recognized that sometimes the smallest gestures of kindness could prevent the biggest tragedies. Mrs. Thompson had completed her community service by developing a comprehensive food security program. Her past actions transformed into a foundation for positive change. Charlie had appointed himself her official assistant, testing new recipes and suggesting superhero names for the healthy meal options, his elementary wisdom continuing to bridge gaps between need and assistance, dignity and charity. The courtroom story had spread beyond their community, inspiring other schools to examine their own systems and assumptions. Charlie now accompanied his father to medical conferences where Dr. Bennett shared how a child's perspective had revealed the human cost of healthcare inequality. The young boy often stole the show during question periods by explaining complex issues with simple truths that adults had somehow forgotten. Judge Rodriguez had framed Charlie's Batman notepad drawings, hanging them in her chambers as a reminder that justice required not just law but wisdom and compassion. She occasionally invited Charlie to visit court-speaking engagements where he helped her explain to law students how true justice meant helping people be their best selves, just like Batman helps Gotham be its best city. On this day of celebration, Charlie stood surrounded by his expanded family of friends, watching as students filled their trays without fear or shame. Officer Hawkins helped Mrs. Thompson serve meals, while Bill Thompson shared recovery stories with clinic patients. Dr. Bennett and board member Reynolds discussed expanding their programs to neighboring districts, and Officer Chen taught junior safety patrol members about protecting with compassion. The small boy who had faced false accusations had sparked a revolution of kindness, his unwavering belief in heroes inspiring adults to become the heroes their community needed.